Chapter 2.
Listen up, ladies and gentlemen. I am Officer Dan Sharp, the guy in the black shirt introduced. And you're about to go to a real prison and meet real criminals. You will see what prison life is like. The prisoners you are about to meet are true, hardened criminals. They've robbed, killed, stolen, and maimed. They've done it all. Be sure to treat them with respect and no bullshit or backsass. You most certainly had better treat me with respect as well. The older guy took the floor. I'm Bob, the captain of the guards, as well as your driver. During this program, I demand that you obey the officers when we arrive at the prison, and you better not do anything stupid. Now, are there any questions? How long will this last? The boy next to me asked. The older guy's face darkened. He sped over to the boy and got in his face. It's over when we say it's over, the old guy shouted. The boy tilted his head back to get a little personal space, but the guy only got closer. It was if he was going to kiss him. Your mommy and daddy sent your badass to us to straighten you up. So that means you're going to be in our house, which means you go by our rules. That means you eat when we say you eat. You leave when we say you leave. And you piss and shit when we say so. You got that, you little monkey sack of shit? Yes, sir, the boy whimpered. Any more questions? The old guy yelled. Nobody said anything. One last thing, the buff guy said. Do not, under any circumstances, bother Bob while he's driving. He's lost a lot of driving skills in his old age, so none of you better distract him. Do I make myself clear? Yes, we all laughed. I saw the buff guy smile at Bob. I bet they were both good friends, and he was joking on him. But the way Bob treated the boy next to me was enough to keep us from a conversation with him. Now everybody on the bus, the old guy ordered. We all walked in a single file line and took our seats on the school bus. I sat in the very front of the bus, while most of the kids went straight to the very back. As I sat there, I looked out the window and thought about what this would be like. I was going to visit a real prison and experience exactly what it's like. I didn't think that much of it. What could be so bad about being locked in a cell? Throughout the drive to the prison, I could hear the other kids talking in the back. It was the typical teenager talk, sex, drugs, violence, and partying. At the time, I didn't know what they were talking about because I was never exposed to those kinds of things. So I didn't pay that much attention. The drive seemed to go on forever. We kept going farther and farther away from civilization. We were now in cow country. All we kept passing were farms, houses, and the occasional gas station. I wondered why they had to be in prison way out here away from almost everything. We finally came to what looked like a town. I saw what looked like to be a small neighborhood, but in the distance was a main building. The sign in front of it read, Kentucky State Penitentiary. It was a humongous castle, and it had medieval-style architectural. It looked like a castle you'd see in the 13th century Europe, and it seemed to dominate the land. It was on for miles. It was big, really big, big enough to make the tallest man feel like a dwarf in his giant house. We parked in front of the building, and were led off by the bus, by Bob. Right before we began making our way to the prison, a shiver ran down my spine. This is when I knew it was for real. We going to the cage that these monsters were held in. Anxiety began to take over me when we began lead across the street and into the pen. When we walked inside, we were greeted by a group of 4 officers. They were wearing the exact same uniform as Bob, except theirs were blue. I saw him walk up to the group and join in like they were his friends. We were led into a room and were showed where the prisoners get their uniforms. The next one was where mug shots were taken. Nothing too special. We were taken to the cell block. There were no prisoners in it, for obvious reasons. It looked like a small room with 2 rows of cells. It was pretty small compared to the outside. "This here is a cell block," said Bob. "It houses Kentucky's most dangerous prisoners. Each cell is 12 feet long in length and 6 feet in width." "That's pretty small," I commented. "Exactly," Bob added. "We don't want to provide them too much comfort to murderers, rapists, and other criminals who need to be here in Supermax. Each of you will be put into a cell individually. The officers will be locking you inside, and myself and Dan will be coming back to retrieve each of you. We will head to the cafeteria for chow time. Then after, we'll talk to some inmates." "Let's get these animals in their cages," said Dan. "We aren't animals," a girl at the end of the line said. "Who said that?" Bob demanded. I shuddered as Bob's scowl came back to show its dark glory. The fact that somebody dared to get smart with him is either stupid or really brave. We all turned back to see the girl, who clearly didn't know she was about to deal with standing with a smart-ass look on her face. I did. "And we don't deserve to be called animals, old man. People like you are the reason places like this are constantly violating human rights, you jarhead jackass." Bob's face boiled with powerful rage. As he charged over to the little girl, he snatched her up by the collar. "Listen, you pathetic delinquent," Bob yelled. "You don't disrespect me or any of the people here. You understand me?" The poor girl was stunned with fear as she stared up at the man. "Answer me," Bob demanded. The girl began to cry. "Say yes, sir." I looked at the other officers to see if they would say anything, but they just stood there, wide-eyed at the situation taking place. They knew that interfering with Bob would only make things worse. "Yes, sir," the girl said through her tears. I didn't hear that. "Say it louder!" "Yes, sir!" the girl shouted. "That's better," Bob growled. "I don't want to hear another goddamn word out of your mouth," he told her. "Let's get all these cons in their cells," Bob commanded the officers. "As for you, missy," Bob said, glaring at his poor new prisoner, "you've just bought yourself a half an hour longer in the cell." Bob then took her to a nearby cell, unlocked it, and shoved the girl inside. He locked it behind her, and she didn't get out. I could hear her screaming and sobbing uncontrollably as she began adapting to her new environment. "Guards, get these motherfuckers in their cells," he said. "If you hear as much as a whisper from these kids, throw them in solitary." "Yes, sir," they all said simultaneously. Each of the guards opened a cell for each of us. I was put in one right next to the door to the girl who suffered from Bob's wrath. When I sat down in the bed, I could hear her through the wall sobbing. "Shut the cages," a guard ordered. The jail door slammed, and one of the guards locked it, preventing my escape. I sat there and thought about what had happened recently, how I had this urge to kill. I now realized the consequences of my actions. If I kill somebody, then this is where I will end up, in a tiny cell for the rest of my life. I would never sleep on a thin mattress, and make matters worse, I knew that food wouldn't be that great either. I would never see my parents or other family members again. Life was completely pointless in prison. There was literally nothing for me to live for. I looked at my bed sheets, and I looked at the ceiling. There was a pipe that was connected to the ceiling. I knew that would be my only way out. I knew that if it ended up here, I had to kill myself. I didn't care what anyone said about it. When you're sentenced to life in prison, your life is over. You're a dead man walking. The law can take everything from you. Everything that makes you who you are. And you will spend your life being controlled by rules that you will be forced to follow for the rest of your life. I couldn't let this happen to me, but that doesn't mean I will change who I am. I knew now that if I was going to satisfy my urge and kill, I couldn't get caught, or else it was game over. I could still hear the girl in the cell next to me, crying, I knew very well if she goes to jail, somebody will kill her, or she would kill herself somehow. "Shut the fuck up in there," yelled Bob. The girl squealed herself into silence when she was startled by Bob's booming voice. I lay down on the bed and stared at the ceiling. I sighed as I thought about the next 3 years I would be in middle school, and the school work would get harder, as well as life in general. If people were going to die by my hand, the question was, how could I get away with it? I had to find some way to make that possible. If I ever got married, would they also be a killer? I was sure no woman would want to marry someone like me. At least, not unless she was a killer herself. I was sure no woman wanted to marry someone like me. At least not unless she was a killer herself. I guess we would have to be a killer couple. I pictured it in my head. Husband and wife slaughtering every human that could take a breath. Maybe they would want to make a movie out of our reign of terror. We would be famous killers like Ted Bundy, Jeffrey Dahmer, or John Wayne Gacy. We could swim naked in the blood of our victims. That was just a twisted fantasy I had. I knew that it would never happen, so I just blocked the dream out of my mind. The mortem was something I had to learn to understand better. If I couldn't learn to control it, I had to make it manageable. "Jordan!" a voice called. I sat up and looked around my cell to see where it was coming from. It sounded like a girl's voice. I just brushed it off as one of the guards outside talking and fell back down. "Jordan!" the voice repeated. I turned over and faced the wall, trying to ignore it. "Jordan!" the voice barked. Whoever it was, they sounded like they were standing right over me. I turned and saw a girl. She was wearing a white toga that trailed down to bare feet. She had golden blonde hair and piercing blue eyes. I was immediately intimidated by her. She had just come from nowhere, and she was standing over me, while I sat up with a shiver ran down my spine and saw her walk towards the cell door. "Follow me, Jordan," said the toga girl. I sat there confused at what I had just seen. I was locked in a cell, and a girl had just came in here and walked right through the cell door, like it wasn't even there. I tried to lay back down and go back to sleep, but I was interrupted when she came back. "Follow me, Jordan," she begged. "Don't make me have to tell you twice." I got out of my cot and followed the girl. I walked completely through the door. I didn't feel the steel or anything solid at all. It was just like air. I knew that I had to be dreaming. This couldn't be real. After I was through my cell door, I found myself in the front yard of a house. The house was small and blue and stood on a riverside. I could see a cliff leading into the river in the backyard of the house. It seemed like big rain could cause the whole house to fall in the river. I looked behind me and saw the cell door standing before it suddenly disintegrated. "Weird," I whispered. I followed the girl into the backyard, and we stood next to each other, and I stared into the river. I was getting very creeped out by this dream. I was ready to wake up, but I couldn't figure out how. The situation was so weird, I couldn't figure out how to escape it. My mind just seemed to be shot. I must have fallen asleep from boredom when I was laying there in the bed. "No need to be afraid," said the girl. I turned around and saw the toga girl standing there behind me. I had mixed feelings at the moment. Should I be scared? Should I be ready to fight this girl? I couldn't figure out a proper reaction to the situation. "I'm on your side, Jordan," she told me. "My name is Artemis." "Nice name," I said. "Now, why did you bring me here?" "To warn you." Suddenly, everything went dark, and I found myself on top of a mountain. I looked around myself. The sky was red, and below me was the ocean, and it had swallowed everything. There was no land, and the only thing that reminded me that land once existed was the tips of the mountain that stuck out of the ocean. The sun was nowhere to be seen, and the same could be said about the moon. All that remained was blood-red sky. I looked behind me and saw what looked like the ruins of a thriving city. Small fires and embers could be seen, hinting that this place had just recently been destroyed. Then, as if on a signal, I heard a voice in my head. It was a smooth and relaxing voice, something that you would hear on a smooth jazz radio station. I couldn't tell if it was male or female, but I remember what it said. Frightful birth, rightful death. Olympus shall crumble under the fist of corruption. I felt something shake me. I was suddenly back at the prison. "Wake up!" shouted Bob. "This is a prison, not a hotel." "How long was I out?" I asked. "It's been 2 hours since you were put in that cell. That's all I know," he answered. "Now get up. It's time for chow." I climbed out of bed and followed Bob out of the cell. I lined up with the other kids outside. I was at the very end of the line. As I looked to my right, I saw the girl come out of her cage, her face still red from crying. She got behind me and sniffled and wiped the leftover tears from her face. "Are you okay?" I asked her. "A little," she replied. "They kept everyone here an extra half an hour because Bob punished me. It's so—" "Hey! Quiet back there!" yelled Bob. The girl and myself instantly shut our mouths, and I turned back around. After that, we were led to the cafeteria, but the guards called it chow time. 3 inmates stood behind the steam table, wielding spoons ready to serve us awful food that was contained in each column. I could see their name tags read Boomer, Red, and Butch. Boomer was a bald, muscle-bound black man who looked like he was in the 40s, and a well-experienced prison veteran. Red was an orange-haired, heavy-set guy who probably spent a little extra time in the kitchen, if you know what I mean. Butch was a thin white guy who was clearly covered in tattoos. Just every visible part of his body had a tattoo on it. "These guys look promising enough," whispered the girl. Before I could respond to that, Bob began speaking. "All right, now each of you will go through the line individually," said Bob. "You will get your food and sit down at one of the tables." "I'm surprised we don't have assigned seats," said the girl behind me. "That is one of the few freedoms you get when you come to prison," added one of the officers. "We don't even get that in school," said the boy in front of me. "You have to go to school for a temporary numbers of years, son," Bob told him. "Are you saying you'd rather be in prison than go to school?" the boy gulped. "No, sir," the boy confirmed. "That's exactly what I want to hear," Bob replied. Bob signaled for us to go through the chow line. I watched in disgust as Boomer plopped what looked like a ball of yellow rice on the first kid's tray. The next inmate, Red, smacked a spoonful of beans on the next part of the tray. The last gave a kid a ladle full of gravy mashed potatoes. My stomach churned at the sight of the horrible food. I always hated mushrooms. They grow on fecal matter, and they taste like bitter, rubbery chew toys. The inmate then dug into what looked like a stiff, dry substance and slapped it onto the boy's tray. When I was next in line, I felt a lump in my throat. I wasn't hungry at all, and I surely didn't want to eat any of the food the prison had to offer. I walked in line and grabbed my styrofoam tray and took my turn. I was greeted with the first course of a disgusting cheese ball of rice, and the smell hit my nostrils like a bullet train. I gagged as I turned my head away from the direction and the putrid stench. The next inmate scooped into my column a murky water and produced a spoonful of black beans. They didn't look that bad, but seemed very watery. The next course was dreaded mushrooms. They smelled worse than the cheese rice. They were covered in gravy, and they looked slippery and slimy. The smell was the combination of raw sewage and old jock straps. "Oh my God," I mumbled. "There's no God in here, son," said Boomer. "You're in our house," laughed Butch. All 3 laughed as Butch gave me my stuff of dry substance, and after seeing it close up, I realized it was old tuna. It was an old hardened ball of white death and smelled like a girl who seriously needed to get off her period. When I got my fork and sat down at the table, I knew I wouldn't be eating any of this without vomiting later. The girl was the last to go through the line and sat next to me. She was still recovering what happened at the cell block, but I could tell by her face she was unprepared for what was coming next. "Listen up," Bob barked. "All of you had better eat every bite of what's on that tray. If you don't, all of you get 2 more hours in the cells. Got it?" "Yes, sir." We all set out in fear. Everyone began eating. Some of the kids nearly swallowed what they had whole, but others weren't so fierce. I watched how other kids gagged in utter disgust as they drowned what food they had. I was struck with fear when Bob yelled at them to not throw up on the floor, or else they'd have to clean it up. I gulped as I took a sharp look at my food. I was scared of throwing it back up, or worse, discovering it was full of fiber, and that I would be on the toilet until I'm 60. "You're just delaying the inevitable, dude," said the girl next to me as she finished up her beans. "You either eat it, or we all go back to the cells." "I know that," I snapped. "Then eat the goddamn food already," she cried. "Alright," I said. "What's your name, by the way?" "Chloe," she answered. "I'm Jordan," I replied. "Nice to meet you," she said. "Now eat up. I don't want to be here all day." I grabbed my fork and began eating the beans. They were the wet and hard, as if I was going to eat gravel out of a lake. It wasn't that bad, but it could be a lot better. I guess prison isn't the place where you go to get food. After that was over, I was met with 3 more options: the tuna, the rice, or the mushrooms. I decided to eat the rice because cheese and rice had to be way better than mushrooms. I dug my fork and took a huge bite and immediately gagged when the terrible food got in my mouth. I nearly spit out the chunk out on the table, but swallowed it when I saw Bob turn my way. "It doesn't taste so good, does it?" asked Bob. I shook my head and moaned from my suffering as I put another chunk in my mouth. It tasted like old nacho cheese mixed with maggots that were dipped in canal oil. It was every bit of nasty, and when I swallowed it, it took every bit of effort in my stomach to hold it down. I was nauseous after that bite. I felt like my stomach was ready to spew out its contents. But I knew I didn't want to clean that up. To make matters worse, I still had a lot more to eat, and I knew it wasn't going to get any better. "Pay attention to what you're eating, kids," Bob announced. "If you come to prison, you have to eat this food 3 times a day." Everyone showed horrified expressions on their face. The fact that anyone would have to eat this disgusting stuff had to be punishment enough. "What if I throw it away?" asked Chloe. Bob turned around and scowled at her. "Little girl, if you throw away your food, the other inmates will be ready to murder you. They may be allowed to waste food at home, but in here, food is like gold. If you decide you don't want it, then you damn sure better give it to somebody else." "He's right," added Boomer. "A new fish threw away his tray one morning at breakfast. Next thing I know, 10 guys were on top of him, stabbing him to death. Prison is no place you want to be. It's hell. In these walls, Boomer has been here for 30 years, said Bob. "My crew and I caught with a felony quantity of marijuana that ended up in a shootout with the police," Boomer explained. "My buddies were shot to death, and I ended up killing 2 cops, which got me life without parole at the age of 16. "That man has been in here for 30 years, Chloe croaked. "Could you imagine being in prison that long?" I asked. "That terrifies me," she remarked. "Eat up, kid," said Bob. I raised my eyebrow at him. "Everyone else is done but you," he noted. I looked around and saw everyone's empty trays. I was scared. I didn't want everyone to have to go back to their cells because of me. Then again, I didn't want to eat this food. "You better be done with that slop in 2 minutes, kid," Bob warned, "or else every single one of these kids going back to their cells, including you." "Officers," Bob barked. "Get these inmates back to their cells pronto." All 4 correction officers led the inmates from behind the steam table out of the cafeteria. But for some reason, Bob needed to speak with Dan in private. I saw him, led him into a corner away from all of these kids. which meant he wasn't paying attention. Chloe whispered, "Eat my food for me." "No way," she hissed. "Why not? You were able to down yours better than me." "That doesn't mean I like it," she protested. I looked at the guard and Bob. They looked like they were about to end their conversation. I had to figure out something quick, or it was back to the cells. "Please just eat the food, or else I'll have to start clean up after I throw it back up," I begged. "Fine," she agreed, "but you owe me big." I breathed a sigh of relief as I watched her scarf down 2 courses of my food in a matter of seconds. I had never felt so good in my life. It was like I literally dodged a speeding bullet. It felt amazing. But all that ended within a few slight seconds. "Why the hell are you eating that kid's food?" yelled Dan. "You son of a bitch," I yelled back. "Who are you calling a bitch?" he challenged. "Both of you shut your mouth," Bob yelled as if he was walking back with his officer. He looked over to me and Chloe. "So you don't want to eat your food, son?" Bob asked. "I stole it from him," Chloe said. "I was still hungry and I wanted more, so I pressured him into giving me more." "Well, at least somebody here likes the food," Bob said, looking at me. "But wait, you still got more on that tray." I looked in horror over to the ball of old tuna. It didn't look very appetizing, or smell that way for the matter. Chloe scooped up some of it with her fork, and when it was more inches from her mouth, she dropped and immediately repulsed by it. "What's wrong?" I asked, concerned. "It fucking stinks," she shouted. "Oh, for crying out loud, it can't be that bad," Bob complained. "Just eat the damn food so we can move on, or else I'm putting you 2 bozos in a cell together." "Just eat it," I told her. "You do it. I'm not eating this crap," she said. I scooped up a fork of tuna and put it in my mouth and immediately gagged. It tastes like rotten fish that has been sitting out in the holy heat of July. I spit it out of my mouth onto the tray, and my stomach churned from the taste still being in my mouth. Suddenly, Bob snatches my tray from me and grabs a fork of my tray from the table across of us. Chloe and I tried to warn him about the disgusting fish, but it was no use. "Both of you better keep your mouths shut if you know what's good for you. I can't even give you kids an empty threat without you being disobedient," he said. Bob then scooped up the whole scoop of tuna and shoved it in his mouth and began chewing. A few seconds later, Bob froze with a wide-eyed expression on his face. He just sat there in the tray in a hand with blank expression. He looked like he was dead standing up. "Bob," said a concerned Dan, "are you okay?" Suddenly, Bob spit the tuna out on the tray. "What the fuck?" Bob roared. "I can't believe the inmates eat this shit. It tastes like rotten pussy." "You've tasted rotten pussy?" Dan laughed. "Oh my god, it's horrible," Bob croaked. "The fucking taste is still in my mouth." Everyone, including myself, laughs hysterically at Bob's reaction to the tuna. It would have to be one of the funniest things I've seen in a long time. The fact that he tried what the inmates were forced to eat on a daily basis and hated it was awesome. "I guess the inmates like rotten pussy," Dan remarked. "Shut the fuck up," Bob yelled with tears in his eyes. "Gee, boss, it's so bad it's making you cry," teased Dan. "Watch yourself, Dan, or I'll make you eat that shit too, motherfucker," Bob threatened. "Alright, kids, no more rotten pussy for today," Bob announced, putting the tray down, recovering from what a short but repulsive ordeal. "We're going to meet some inmates. Let's line up." We all got in a single file line and were led out of the cafeteria. We were then taken into a room that had chairs lined up in a single row for all of us to sit in. We all sat down and Bob began to speak. "Alright, kids, in a few moments the inmates will be coming to speak with you. Until the time's up, they are in full control of the session. But the other officers will be in the back of the room in case things go south. That's the only times we will interfere, so be respectful to the inmates. We don't have much longer until you all go home." Bob grabbed his radio from his belt and said he was ready for the inmates to come in and speak. He then walked out of the room not long after the officers walked in. 4 other inmates came in. The inmates stood directly in front of each other and us and waited until the officers went to the back of the room. The inmate that stood in front of us was a larger man, with a long face and thin beard. He gave off a cocky vibe, as if he was on top of everything here in the prison. The only other way to put it is, if he were in high school, he would be the most popular guy in the school, and probably be captain of the football team. "What's up, dirtbags?" he introduced. "My name's Brandy Anthony Smith, but my friends call me Hell Valley." "Why do they call you that?" I asked. He smirked and gave a chuckle to his other inmates. "Because I worship the fucking devil." No, I'm kidding. "It's because of the things I've done to people. Because what I did. People often tell me I'm going to hell. Not to mention I lived in the Ohio River Valley. So I put the names together and got Hell Valley. You see, I used to be a big-time drug kingpin. I would be the man you wanted to go if you wanted the good stuff. I had a crew to roll with, and I was all set. But I had a system. If I ever thought you were dumb enough to snitch on to the feds, I would fucking slaughter you." Everyone gasped and had wide-eyed looks on their face. We were standing face to face with a real murderer, and he wasn't afraid to show it off. "Calm your panties, kids," he remarked. "I rarely got my hands dirty. I always had my crew do it for me. Most people would just shoot somebody for me. I thought if you were going to be a snitch to the pigs, you were just as bad as they were. So, I would have my men cut up whoever dared tell on me. I would tell them to treat that person as if they were a little piggy at the slaughterhouse, ready to be turned into sausage." "How did you get caught?" asked Chloe. The psychopath gave a crooked smile. "How did I get caught? Well, I don't want to get into that right now. Let's take some time to talk to you guys. What are you in here for, Missy?" "I had to come here because I kept fighting in school. I steal from people and—" "We have a thief on our hands, guys," Hell Valley interrupted. "Do you know what we do to people who steal in prison? We give them early releases out of the back door, and you join the rest of the lowlifes rotting in unmarked graves." "Do you know what we do to people in prison?" "We give them early releases out of the back door, and you join the rest of the lowlifes rotting in unmarked graves." "He's right," agreed the inmate to the right of him. "You leave only two ways when you come to prison. The front door or the back. If you go out of the front, you're free. But the back means you're getting ready to be taken a patch of land not too far from here, and a group of cons dig a hole and chuck your corpse in it. You don't get a funeral. All we do is cover you up with dirt, and you get a headstone with a number on it." "I've seen way too much death within these walls," Hell Valley said. "Only the strong survive, and little thieving pricks like you never last that long." Hell Valley turned his attention to me. "You're a little on the short side to be doing anything bad. How'd you end up here?" "For fighting, and I also killed a hamster," I answered. "That's the first sign of a serial killer," Hell Valley replied. "I've killed before, and I never felt the least bit of remorse after it. However, I never got a thrill off it like my buddy Lance here." He gestured to the felon on his right. "Now, I wouldn't say I got a thrill out of it," Lance corrected. "I served as a hitman, which meant I had to enjoy it to some degree. But that's not how I get my kicks. Murder is a serious crime, which had landed Brandy and a lot of other inmates here for the rest of their lives. It's not anything you want to do. Plus, knowing that you took the lives of other people and seeing their families in court with you is just beyond intimidating." "I can see why," I said. Hell Valley gave me a crooked smile. "So, did you get a parole with life sentence?" asked Chloe. "I sure did. And for some reason, that dumbass of a judge thought I was worthy of another chance at life on the outside. If I changed my ways and convicted a parole board, I was good shit, but got one part of that wrong. You can't change a monster." Hell Valley was right. You can't change a monster, which is probably why he never was going to get out. Regardless of him having parole, you're never getting out of here, I taunted. "What? What did you say, fool? Hell Valley challenged. You're never going to get out of here? I repeated. Why on earth would you let a maniac like you out? The judge probably felt sorry for you, so he gave you a false chance of getting out. You better watch what you say to me, he warned. Hey kid, Bob shouted. It's the inmate's time to talk, so shut up. This kid has a mouth on him, Hell Valley growled. Easy, Brady. You don't want to go back in the hole again, do you? I don't give a fuck about the hole, man, Hell Valley yelled. I fucking hate this kid. He tried to grab me, but a couple of guards grabbed him before he could reach me. As he was being dragged out of the room, he kept yelling and cursing at me. But I'll never forget the last thing he said to me. When I do get out of here, I'm going to hunt you down and I'm going to cause imaginable pain. He was then dragged out of the room, and the door was slammed behind him. After that was over, the rest of our session was the inmates talking to the rest of the group and giving advice. It went surprisingly well for what it's worth. We then got on the bus and began a journey back to Louisville. As I stared out of the window, I couldn't help but think about what Hell Valley said to me. He clearly wanted me dead for disrespecting him. The scary thing was, I never know when or if he would be released. Before I could think any more about it, I heard someone sit next to me. When I looked to my left, I saw a very irritated Chloe. Did you think I've forgotten about what happened back there? She said. No, how could you? I replied. Then you still know that you better pay me back for the garbage you made me eat. I laughed. What do you want? Money? I haven't decided yet, she mused. All I know, if we're keeping in touch until I do decide. Do you want to exchange numbers? I offered. Of course. She confirmed. We exchanged cell phone numbers so that I could one day pay her back for the prison food I made her eat. I didn't know it then, but that moment we started a long friendship. When we got back to the station, my dad was standing outside his cruiser waiting for me. I walked up to the car and got in the front seat. So, how did it go? He asked, getting into the car and beginning to drive home. It was very eye-opening, I sighed. Did you get anything out of it? He asked. To put it bluntly, all I got was, don't be bad or you'll end up in jail. Also, I had a pretty bad confrontation with one of the inmates. That's true, but I see that you're still letting it sink in, or so how do we discuss this later? But I want to know about this confrontation. I told him about the incident with Hell Valley, and what he said to me before getting dragged away. Jesus, sounds like a real nut job, my dad shuddered. Yeah, tell me about it, I agreed. You shouldn't have egged him on, though, Dad said. I realize that now. That's the joy hindsight, Dad smiled. Now, when we get home, I want to talk about this killing over dinner. There was nothing to talk about. The whole thing seemed hopeless. If I didn't kill, I'd be left with the constant urges. If I did, I would eventually go to jail, and then after that, I would kill myself. So either I was going to kill myself, somebody would kill me in prison, or maybe somebody would kill me outside this world. So either way, I was going to die. Someday, somehow, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. As the 3 months passed, I still had the urge to kill, but I didn't do anything to satisfy it. I didn't get in any fights, nor did I think about trying to hurt anybody. It was getting to the point that I had to find a way to satisfy this urge. So I resorted to killing animals. My parents would let me in the backyard, and I would find so many little animals and bugs. I would find myself stabbing a bird that fell from its nest with a piece of tree bark. Or I would rip off the legs of a cricket and imagine it screaming in pain as I slowly dismembered the creature. If I was really lucky, a stray cat would wander into my yard, and I would then close my back gate so it couldn't escape. And I wouldn't let it go into the house, and grab one of the sharp kitchen knives. Going outside, I would grab the cat and throw it into my garage to carve pieces of its skin from the animal. I would always love it when they would claw at me. in an attempt to get me to stop. But it would only encourage me to keep going. I would hold down the cat and proceed to saw its paws off. Blood would splatter everywhere, and the cat would shriek in excruciating pain. After I amputated the cat's foot, I would open it up and rip the guts out. Sometimes I would pick them up and show it to the cat so he could see what his own insides looked like. After it met its demise, I would simply throw the carcass and guts in the trash bin and clean up the rest of the mess. Animals were never really my thing. Humans created civilization. We created art. We go to school and learn more knowledge and discover new things. Animals will always be the same, just simple creatures that run on instincts. The only time I felt sorry for killing an animal was when a puppy one day wandered into my backyard. It was a small little Labrador puppy, probably the most adorable thing I had ever seen in my life. It ran up and wagged its tail and barked at me. I could tell it was in a playful mood. I picked up the puppy and held it close to me as it began to lick my face. I felt so happy because I knew that this creature liked me. All of that seemed to end when I was glancing at my garage, the house of pain that I used to satisfy my murderous hunger for death. I began to feel mortem go through my body. I stood there motionless as it took its toll on the poor young soul. I knew what was in store for this puppy. With the puppy in my arms, I walked over to the garage and threw it outside. I then walked to my house and grabbed the largest kitchen knife I could find before returning. The puppy looked at me with large, shiny green eyes and panted as it wagged its tail. I walked over to it and held it down while I cut a slit down the dog's body and dug my fingers into the wounds to peel a large ribbon from its flesh. It howled in pain, loud and high pitch. I was struck with fear of my parents hearing the noises, finding me with the dog. I didn't want to get punished, so I grabbed the dog by the throat and clamped its mouth shut as tight as I could. I grabbed the knife and slowly pressed it into the puppy's stomach. It wiggled from my grip. It started squealing in pain. It laid there in shock and squealed in pain, went through its body. I panicked. I ripped my knife from the puppy's stomach and began stabbing it. I stabbed and I stabbed the creature numerous times until it was nothing but a mangled mess of flesh and bone. Blood was all over the garage, the floor, the walls, even the ceiling. Scared, I turned back to go to the house and clean it up. The mess only to be found by my mother standing in the garage doorway, in shock what I did. "Oh my God," she cried. "What have you done? That was the neighbor's new puppy." I looked over to the mangled carcass and saw the red dog collar with a golden keychain on it. "Oh my God," she cried. "What have you done? That was the neighbor's new puppy." I looked over to the mangled carcass and saw the red dog collar with a golden bone keychain on it. "Oops," I muttered. "Get in the house right now," Mom shouted. "I'm sorry, Mom," I said. "Just get to the house and go to your room," she hollered. I ran into the house and went into the bedroom, scared of the upcoming consequences. I could hear my mother in the kitchen screaming to my dad on the phone. I knew that when he came home, he was going to be upset with me because I went against everything we talked about. This was it. I was going to be grounded in my room till I went to college. I didn't leave my room at all. Not for the rest of the day. I nearly lost control of my bladder when my father walked into the house. It wasn't long before I heard them arguing about what they should do about me. I decided to call it a night and go to bed and deal with whatever I have to in the morning. As I lay in my bed, I drifted off into sleep and let my worries fade. As I was about to lose consciousness, I heard my door open and my lights come on. My heart sank like a stone into my stomach because I knew who had walked in. "We need to talk." "Sorry, Dad. I'm sorry I killed the puppy, okay? Sorry doesn't cut it," my dad snapped. "First your classmate's hamster, now the neighbor's puppy. Do you realize what this could do if they find out what happened to their dog? So, what's going to happen to me? Will I go to jail this time?" "No, I am not going to ground you either," he answered. "However, If anything like this ever happens again, you're going to counseling every Saturday morning until I say otherwise. Alright, I won't kill any more animals or get into any more fights anymore. I promised. Alright, son, good night, he said. And with that, he left my room and shut the door behind him. End of chapter 2.